Shalom, everybody. Um, this is going to be a very different video than what I usually do. Um, Normally, I'm comparing the Septuagint and the Masoretic. I will be doing that today, but on a different kind of format. I watched this video today from Joel Richardson. You can see right here. It's called "The Underground Episode Number 36: The Timing of the Magog invasion. It's got 8,135 views. It was from about 4 years ago, just over 4 years ago now. And this is a very underrated video. I'm gonna just give it a thumbs up. So, what happened today is that I watched this video, and let me just take that off there. Yeah, so I watched this video, and when I researched what he was talking about, the truth of what he was saying, actually not the truth of what he's saying, but the truth regarding what he was saying, the actual truth from the scriptures that he quoted, uh, hit me so hard. I had to lie down. I literally lied down on the floor for about 15 to 30 minutes. I was just out cold. I couldn't even, not that I was unconscious, but I just lost all the strength in me. I realized, the old adage, the old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me, is a lie. That's a lie, big lie. Because, for instance, if you have someone like Caesar or any dictator, and their words can cause life or death. So if somebody says, I want this person to be taken out, that word leads to death. It will not just hurt you, it will kill you. And on the other hand, if someone says, let this person be safe, protect them, words can preserve life as well. And the word became flesh. I mean, it's very anti-biblical to say this saying that kids say words can never hurt you. I think they're saying that words won't affect me, in my feelings or my body. But if someone is powerful enough, yeah, their words will hurt you. Yeah, so I wanted to do this video first to set my priorities right. And this might be one of the most important videos I'll ever do because this channel, as you know, is called Secrets Revealed, the Holy Bible. Never really thinking what the meaning of this channel, even why I came up with that word or title or that name, or why I was led to that decision. But I just always like that, Secrets Revealed. It's like the Masked Magician and Fox a long time ago. I remember that show. But I think deeper down, this channel, I'm not saying it does, but there's a chance it may be related to prophecy. There's a prophecy that says, uh, Daniel, the words will be sealed until the end time. I believe that the more people open their eyes, or I should say, Yah opens their eyes to his words as revealed in the Septuagint, when they turn away from the Masoretic text, which was created by antichrist people who are against the gospel of Christ and that he was, in fact, God, then the Son of God, and is Yah, and is the prophesied Messiah, and his name was Yeshua, or Jesus Christ, however you want to say it. He was the anointed one. If more people would be awakened to this fact that the Masoretic has been manipulated to such a degree that it's very, it changes the world, really. Changes your perspective on yourself, on Israel, on everyone, and especially God, on the Father. So without further ado, I'm going to get into this video. It's 28 minutes long. I'm just going to watch it and pause where it is significant, where I find the big differences, and it's when he brings up the scripture. But I've been listening to his channel now for, I'm going to say, at least 2 weeks, maybe a month, and I have agreed with the majority of what he's saying, except in this video. It's the first time I've actually diverged from what he's saying, not because fundamentally I don't believe what he's saying. It's just because he's using the Masoretic text. So let's start in 3, 2. Oh, before let me just make sure the sound is working. I'm going to put share sound, and hopefully it works now if it wasn't working before.
The testimony of the biblical prophets, the gospel of Jesus Christ, current events, and how all of these things relate to you and me. Now, in this week's episode, I want to return once again to the critical prophecy of the battle of Gog of Magog. Gog and Magog, Ezekiel 38 and 39. Now, we've touched on this passage a handful of times, and I'm sure we'll continue to come back to it. The bottom line is this is probably the most critical, looming Old Testament passage that speaks about the final battles of the Antichrist, the final rage of Satan against Israel and against God's people. And I'm convinced that a misunderstanding of this critical prophecy is one of the most significant reasons why so much of the church misunderstands these final several years before the return of Jesus. Okay, so here's one of the big issues that comes up a lot in questions. After I teach in the Q&A time, people send me emails. A lot of people say, "Well, Joel, you're trying to say that Ezekiel 38, 39 is speaking of the final battles of the Antichrist, that Gog is the Antichrist. What about Revelation 20? Because in my book, Mideast Beast, I actually don't deal with Revelation 20, because in Revelation 20, you also have a reference to Gog of Magog, or Gog and Magog, but it's at the end of the millennium. It's at the end of the millennium. And so this is, a lot of people go, so clearly what Ezekiel is speaking of is post-millennial. In other words, it happens at the end of the millennium, and it's not talking about the Antichrist. So this is an issue that I want to deal with today, and this is an issue that has confused a lot of people. It's really confused a lot of believers. And I want to just deal with some of the issues of why this is clearly a wrong interpretation. If we are trying to equate Ezekiel 38, 39 with the Gog and Magog that's referenced at the end of the millennium in Revelation 20, we're clearly making a big mistake, because these are two completely different events. Now, obviously, by Revelation using the term Gog Magog, there are some similarities that we need to take note of, but I want to just deal with the issue of why these are two different events, that one takes place just before the millennium, and one takes place at the very end of the millennium. Why Revelation 20 and why Ezekiel 38 and 39 are two different events. So first of all, let's go ahead and just read Revelation 20. We're not going to read all of Ezekiel 38, 39, obviously, but let's go ahead and just read the bit that talks about Gog, Magog in Revelation 20. So Revelation 20, beginning in verse 7, it says, "When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison, and he will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth." And then it says, "Gog and Magog, and to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. They march across the breadth of the earth, and they surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves, but fire came down from heaven and devoured them." And then it goes on to say, "The devil who deceived them is thrown into the lake of burning sulfur with the beast and the false prophet, where they had also been thrown. And together the three of them, the evil three, if you will, they will be tormented day and night forever and ever," which ties into some of my previous programs on the issue of the eternality, the eternal conscious torment of hell. Nevertheless, when you read this passage, it basically says that at the end of the millennium, Satan is released. He gathers together all of these rebellious peoples from across the land, across the earth. They march toward Israel, and then fire comes down from heaven and devours them. And it's very clear. Let me read this again. It says, they surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves, but fire came down from heaven and devoured them. So, first of all, let me just say this. What is Revelation is speaking of, that invasion is a complete failure. It says that they come to surround the city of God, but instead fire comes down from heaven and devours them. Now, in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and this is important, in Ezekiel 38 and 39, the invasion is successful. Now, there are some similarities because ultimately they are devoured by fire. Most of the armies in Ezekiel 38 are devoured by fire comes down from heaven. It's similar. However, we need to highlight the fact that Ezekiel's invasion is successful. And this is something that people always seem to miss. They read Ezekiel 38, 39, and they go, no, these guys come against Israel, but before they even get there, they are wiped out and burnt up. And that is clearly not the case at all. So the passage begins, and we need to realize that Ezekiel 38, 39 is not a very brief prophecy. It begins all the way back with the thought being placed in Gog's mind, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. So the very idea of invading Israel, this is when the prophecy begins, and it actually ends with the parousia. It ends with the Lord being on the ground in Israel. It ends with the return of Jesus. And I've talked about this in other shows, but let's just begin with the description of the people that are being invaded. And so in chapter 38, verse 8.
Okay, so here I'm going to pause it and open up the Bible here. So it's Ezekiel. Let me open that up. 38. And we have to look, it's important we look at this side by side and prove it. That's the Berean mindset. That should be the believer's mindset. So he said in Ezekiel 38, and he's quoting, I think he said verse 8.
It says, after many days, it's talking to Gog, it says, you will be called to arms. In future years, you will invade a land that has recovered from war, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel. So it's clearly talking about Israel, to people who have recovered from war and tumult and persecution and all of the things that the Jews have put up with. They've been regathered to Israel. And then it says, which had been long desolate. Okay, it's a perfect description of Israel today. It had long been desolate. Now the people have been returned to the land. They've been regathered. They have been brought out from the nations, and now all of them live in safety. You and all your troops and the many nations with.
Okay, so this is where we have to stop and just look at the side by side. So it says, he shall be prepared after many days. I think this is talking about either the Antichrist or Israel. Let me just look at the context. Son of man, set your face against Gog, the land of Magog, Ros, prince of Mesach, and Tubal. Prophesy against him. I am against you, Ros, prince of Mesach. So that's the name of this individual. I'll gather you and all your hosts. So he's going to gather all their armies there, including Persians, Ethiopians, Libyans, all with helmets and shields. Gomer, the house of Torgama, from the end of the north. You be prepared, prepare yourself, you and all your multitude that is assembled with you, and you shall be to me for a guard. So this is talking to Gog and Magog. He shall be prepared after many days. He shall come at the end of years. So this is talking about Gog and Magog again. That is brought, come to a land that is brought back from the sword. Brought back from the sword. Okay. So they're rescued from the sword. When the people are gathered from many nations against the land of Israel. So this is talking about, again, Gog and Magog. They're going to be gathered against the land of Israel. He shall come at the end of years, um, shall come to a land, shall come into the land, a land brought back from the sword. So it's similar here. And gathered out of many people. Okay, here it's starting to differ. Um, the people when are gathered many nations. So many nations will be gathered against the land of Israel. Here it says in the Masoretic, uh, you shall come into the land brought back from the sword, gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel. So it's more cryptic in the Masoretic. It's saying that um, you shall come into the land. I think it's confusing. It sounds like it's talking about Israel. Israel is going to become back. Is going to return to the land, gathered out of many people. So they're taking Israel out of people against the mountains of Israel, or maybe it's talking about Gog and Magog being set up against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste. But it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. So here we see a divergence. We can see that not only is it not talking about Israel, it's talking about Gog and Magog, and these are people gathered, many nations against the land of Israel, not the mountains, it's the actual land. And whether you believe the people in that land now are Israel or not, doesn't matter. It's the land itself is where geographically Israel was uh, on the ancient maps. So they're gathered against this land, which was entirely desolate. And it was true. It wasn't really, it was not inhabited by a Jewish state. It wasn't recognized as a Jewish state before 1948. He has come forth out of the nations, uh, and they shall all dwell securely. So it sounds like Israel came out of the nations, and they shall all dwell securely or safely. So there's a little bit of difference there. I'm going to keep going.
You will go up, advancing like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land. Okay, so it refers to these people. They've been regathered. Now, the question is this talking about Israel now or at the end of the millennium? You could say so far that it could be referring to either one. And then in verse 11, again, it's talking to Gog. The sovereign Lord says to Gog, he says, you will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls,
Okay,
without
so he
gates and bars. I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against.
okay. I have to pause again because he skipped to verse 11. So I think the question here is, he shall be prepared after many. Is this talking about Israel or Gog and Magog? Um, he shall come at the end of years. This could be Israel. You be prepared. Prepare yourself, you and all your multitude that is assembled with you, for you shall be to me for a guard. So, I mean, we can see the word of Yah came to me, to Ezekiel, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog and the land of Magog, Ros, prince of Mesach and Tubal. Say to him, thus says Yah Elohim, behold, I am against you, Ros, prince of Mesach. So he's talking, this is who he's addressing, Ros, prince of Mesach and Tubal. And he's saying, I'll gather you. Um, and then Persians, Ethiopians, Libyans, Gomer. And then he's saying, you be prepared. So this is a little mysterious. Is he still talking to, is he still addressing Gog and Magog and all these people? Or is he talking about to Israel now? Um, you shall be to me for a guard. So they're guarding Israel? I don't understand. Okay, so it's a little mysterious. He shall be prepared. After many days, he shall come at the end of years. Um, shall come to a land that is brought back from the sword, when the people are gathered from many nations against the land of Israel, which was entirely desolate. He has come forth out of the nations. So this, to me, it sounds like it could be Israel, that he will be prepared. He shall come at the end of years. But why would he come at the end? I mean, is this the end of years, 1948? Or if it's not Israel, because it says he has come forth out of the nations, and a lot of Jewish people came out of the nations and went to Israel. But this could also be Gog and Magog, that he's going to be prepared and go to the land of Israel at the end of years. So it could be either or. And then you shall go up as rain, arrive as a cloud to cover the land, and there shall be you and all that are about you, and many nations with you. So this could be, again, Israel, like what Joel was saying, or it could be Gog and Magog, who have occupied the land. Could be either or. I'm not going to say it's easy to know, but there are two possibilities. And then it says, "Thus says Yah Elohim, it shall also come to pass in that day that thoughts shall come up into your heart, and you shall devise evil devices." So now it does sound like Gog and Magog. So maybe he wasn't addressing Israel at all, because he would say, this is the word to Israel, right? Thus says Yah, shall come to pass at the same time shall things come into your mind. Okay. Things, not thoughts. Okay. And mind instead of heart, you shall think an evil thought. Just one thought. Okay. Well, it says evil devices. These are evil plans. And then verse 11, where he is currently, you shall say, I will go up to the rejected land. So this is Gog and Magog, clearly. I will come upon them that are at ease and tranquility and dwelling in peace, all inhabiting a land in which there is no wall, nor bars, nor have they doors. You shall say, I'll go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, neither bars nor gates. So it's pretty similar in that case. I'm going to let him keep speaking.
It's the resettled ruins and the people gathered from all of the nations, rich in livestock, goods, living at the center of the earth. So first of all, we need to understand that with Ezekiel 38, it's bookended. It begins with this picture of these people who have returned from the nations. They've resettled the land. They're in Israel. They are rich. They're basically living securely. Now, we're going to come back to this because people go, well, Israel's clearly not living securely now. And clearly they have a wall. You know, they have the security wall. So that can't be referring to Israel. First of all, let me just say this. It's not talking about a nation that doesn't have any walls anywhere. Every nation in the world has walls. You know, it's talking about the lack of walled fortress cities, as was common in ancient times when every major city had a wall around it. It was guarded and protected. Israel is not that way. Yes, it has the security wall through the West Bank, but by and large, the nation of Israel is not a nation of walled cities. That's all it's talking about. It's not saying that, well, they have a wall, therefore it doesn't count, but they're not living securely. Yes, basically, if you go to Israel today, you feel secure. They're not expecting some imminent invasion of multiple nations, all from all over the earth, to invade them. They're not expecting that. They're basically expecting life to go on as usual. If you ask your average Israeli, say, is there going to be another massive, full-blown military invasion of Israel, multinational invasion? They'd say, no, that's not going to happen. We're dealing with terrorists on this side, terrorists on that side, and this sort of thing. No one's expecting a massive regional invasion like that. They go, maybe we're dealing with Hezbollah up here, we're dealing with Hamas down here. They don't expect a massive regional caliphate, if you will, to form to invade the land of Israel. They are living in a state of unsuspectingness. Okay, we're going to touch back on that. But first of all, you deal with Israel. They've been regathered to the land. But here's the thing, and this is the point that almost everyone misses, because as I said, the prophecy is bookended. It begins with Israel living in the land, living securely, and it ends, and this is critical, now please hear me, it ends with the Lord on the ground delivering the Jewish captives from throughout the nations that are Israel's enemies. Israel begins in the land secure, and it ends with Israel coming back, and the captives, not just the exiles, but the captives, i.e. prisoners of war, are being returned to Israel. So let's go ahead and just read this reference here at the end of chapter 39, or toward the end, because this is the part that almost everyone misses. So these are all the things that happen as a direct result of the destruction of Gog and his armies. Gog and his armies are destroyed, and then it explains what will take place as a result of this. So beginning in verse 21, the Lord says, I will display my glory among the nations. All the nations.
Okay, so let's let this load up. Verse 21.
All the Gentiles will see the punishment I inflict and the hand I lay on them. Now, hear this. From that day forward, the people of Israel will know that I am the Lord their God. Now, if this takes place at the end of the millennium, then what that means is that Israel doesn't even come to know the Lord their God until after 1,000 years of Jesus ruling from Jerusalem. That doesn't work. That is ridiculous. You know, there's even been efforts to, quote, debunk the Islamic Antichrist theory. And they're forced to take this position that Ezekiel 38:39 is referring to.
Okay, so in order for me to really get a good picture of what he's talking about, I'm going to just scan through this really quick. So we ended up at 12. Okay. So it is talking about you shall come upon my people Israel as a cloud. So it is talking about Gog and Magog. So he's using them like a type of Egypt so that he can show his power. So I'm setting this up in order to showcase my power, to show who I am. So I would bring you up against them, meaning Israel. Okay, this sounds like something massive going on here. Basically, it's going to be a huge earthquake. Something is going to be very obvious to all of creation on that day, especially in this geographic area. So it's going to be raining fire and brimstone, literally. So that's how they're going to be. They said fire will come down from heaven. That's exactly what it is here. I'll be magnified, sanctified, glorified. I'll be known in the presence of many nations. So a lot of countries will realize this is divine intervention. So I'm going to now go to 39 and see where he is. Just make my way up there, just get the full context. I don't want to take this out of context, not understanding the frame. So he's setting them up for failure, Gog and Magog. They're going to be eaten by animals. Okay. You shall know that it shall be, says Yah. This is the day concerning which I have spoken. So he's going to make Gog a tomb, a burial place. They're going to bury Gog. They will call it the burial place of Gog, or in the Hebrew, Haman Gog. The house of Israel shall bury them. The land may be cleansed in the space of 7 months, very specific time. And it says, it was glorified, not I shall be glorified. Not that he won't be, but it just doesn't say that. They shall appoint men over the land to bury them that have been left on the face. So they're going to keep burying people. Wow, it's a lot of burying going on. The name of the city shall be Burial Place, Hamona, because you need to do that, or otherwise it's going to be unclean with all the dead bodies around. It has to be ceremonially, ritually, just Torahly acceptable by the Torah. You son of man, say thus says Yah, every winged bird gather yourselves. Okay, there's a great sacrifice, a great feast for them. You shall drink the blood of princes of the earth, and calves and goats. They're all fatted calves. I guess that's like a metaphor. They're not literally calves, but they are like that to them. You shall eat fat till you are full, drink wine till you're drunken. And I think the Masoretic actually gets it better here. It's blood. It's not literally wine. They're not going to take their wine. They're going to drink their blood. You shall be filled at my table. Horse and rider, mighty man. So that's what they're eating and drinking. I will set my glory among you, and all the nations shall see my judgment. So, no, he's not setting his glory among the heathen. It's among him, you meaning Israel. And the nations shall see my judgment, which I have worked, and my hand, which I have brought upon them. Okay, so it differs in that. The house of Israel shall know that I am Yah from this day and onwards. So let's keep listening.
To the end of the millennium. Anyone who takes that position has to basically say that Jesus is an incredibly impotent Messiah, that he returns, and 1,000 years after he has returned, Israel still doesn't know him. There's no way that you can make that work. So it says, as a result of Gog and his armies being destroyed, it says, they will know that I'm the Lord. The nations will know that the people of Israel, now hear this, they began in the land. And then it says, the nations will know the people of Israel went into exile for their sin because they were unfaithful to me. So I hid my face from them and I handed them over to their enemies. And then they all fell by the sword. I dealt with them according to their uncleanness and their offenses, and I hid my face from them. So he says, listen, when Gog is destroyed.
Okay, so I have to read what he just read. All the nations shall know that the house of Israel were led captive because of their sins. So it agrees there, but they rebelled against me. And I turned away my face from them and delivered them into the hands of their enemies, and they all fell by the sword. So this is talking about Israel. Because they rebelled, they're going to all fall by the sword. Not like literally all of them are going to be genocided, but it's saying a large number of them will die from violence. According to their uncleannesses and according to their transgressions, did I deal with them, and I turned away my face from them. So this is Yah saying, yeah, they sinned, and this is the consequence. No one gets away with anything unless he's merciful. He decides to be merciful. But in this case, he's executing his judgment, righteous judgment. So let's continue listening.
Then the nations, the Gentiles, will know that Israel went into exile. Now, you can say, well, is that historical? No, it's clearly something that takes place after they have already been living in the land and secure. Because let's read on, verse 25. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Now I will restore the fortunes of Jacob. Now, this is translated variously in different translations. Some say, I will restore the captivity of Jacob. But it is not until the destruction of Gog that the Lord says, I'm going to restore the fortunes and the captivity of Israel. Well, wait a minute. We know that the Lord does that at the beginning of the millennium, not at the end, not 1,000 years after he's already been on the ground. I will restore the fortunes of Jacob. I will have compassion on all the people of Israel, and I will be zealous for my holy name. Now watch this. Verse 26, they will forget their shame and all the unfaithfulness they showed toward me when they lived in safety in their land with no one to make them afraid. Okay? It begins with them living in the land in safety. And then at the end, they are being restored from captivity and exile. And he says, and then they will remember their unfaithfulness toward me when they lived in the land safely. So it's referring back.
Okay, I have to pause it here because this is where I greatly diverge. I greatly disagree, not because it's just my opinion, but because of what the word says. So, verse 25, it says, therefore, thus says Yah Elohim, now will I turn. So, this is the good news. Now will I turn back captivity in Jacob, and will have mercy on the house of Israel, and will be jealous for the sake of my holy name. So, the Masoretic is saying he's going to bring back again the captivity of Jacob. So, he's going to bring them back into being occupied. So, how is that merciful? I'm going to have mercy on you and have you being taken over. That's not merciful. So, this verse in the Masoretic is a big contradiction. So, if anyone is saying, the Bible contradicts itself and they bring up this verse, I can't disagree with them. I can't say, oh, no, it doesn't mean that. No, it is a contradiction. God's merciful, but he's bringing them back into to be invaded and occupied. Doesn't make sense to me. The Septuagint, however, is correct because it says here, now will I turn back captivity. So if you turn back from where you're going the other way. So he's actually, I'm going to turn back what I said. He's going to remove captivity in Jacob. So they were occupied. He's going to remove that captivity. They're not going to be occupied anymore. They're going to be free. And that's how he's showing his mercy. It makes complete sense to me. And then verse 26, you thought the differences couldn't get bigger. It's just snowballing now. So it says in the Masoretic, let me go look at the Masoretic, what Joel Richardson read. After that, they have borne their shame. So they're going to feel ashamed and all their trespasses whereby they have trespassed against me. When they dwelt safely in their land and none made them afraid. So this is the consequence of them feeling shamed and they realize their mistakes. So God is going to put them back into captivity. Doesn't make sense. But here it says in the Septuagint, they shall bear their reproach and the iniquity which they committed when they dwelt upon their land in peace. Yet there shall be none to terrify them. So he's not saying that they're going to get away, scot-free with everything they've done, all their iniquities. They're going to bear their reproach. There's going to be consequences for that. But ultimately, Elohim is saying that I'm going to turn back your captivity. I'm going to have mercy on you. Yeah, there's consequences you're going to suffer for it. People will be killed. You'll be invaded at first, but I'm going to reverse that. That's what he's saying. It's very good news. Okay. Let's see. Let him continue speaking.
Back to the state that they were at the beginning of the passage. And he says, then they will know that when they lived in the land in safety, I gave them safety, yet they didn't obey me. And this is the state of Israel today. I'm not saying there are no believers in Israel. We have a growing messianic community. This is a fantastic seed of what the Lord is ultimately going to do. But the majority, the overwhelming majority of Israel today, whether they're religious or secular, are living in unbelief. They are not living in obedience to the Messiah. They are not living in obedience to the Lord God of Israel. And so he clearly, this is the bookend. Let me read it again. They will forget their shame and all their unfaithfulness they showed toward me when they lived in safety in their land with none to make them afraid, when I have brought them back from the nations and have gathered them from the countries of their enemies. Do you see that? He says, after I bring them back from the lands of their enemies. So it begins with this invasion. Their enemies, Gog, Magog, invades them. They live in safety. And it ends with Israel coming back to the land as former captives. He says, then they will know that I'm faithful to them. Despite their unfaithfulness, then they will know that I have been faithful to them.
Okay, so I'm not sure what translation he's reading from, but in verse 26, it doesn't say that they have remembered after they remembered their shame. It's after they have borne their shame. So they've it's like they're accountable. They're taking responsibility for what they've done. So I give credit to the Masoretic in that verse.
And I will be proved holy through them in the sight of many nations. This is all about God vindicating himself publicly before all the nations, vindicating himself before the principalities and the powers of the air, vindicating himself before his people Israel. Throughout all the nations, the Lord will be shown to be faithful and holy, and that he will be shown to have been faithful to his very words, all the way back to the Abrahamic covenant. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God. For though I sent them into exile among the nations, I will gather them to their own land, not leaving any behind. I will no longer hide my face for them. And then get this, I will pour out my spirit on my people Israel, declares the sovereign Lord. When does the Lord pour out his spirit on his people Israel? Well, we know in Zechariah 12, it is when they look upon the one they have pierced, and they mourn and weep for him as one mourns for an only begotten son. And then the Lord says, and I will pour out a spirit of grace and supplication upon them. So the point is this, all Israel comes to faith. They come to know the Lord their God and Yeshua their Messiah when Yeshua the Messiah returns. That doesn't happen at the end of the millennium. There is no way you can make that work. And so first of all, this is the first point, is that Ezekiel 38:39, this invasion, it is successful. It is wildly successful. It begins with Israel in the land dwelling safely, and it ends with them being returned as captives of war from the lands of their enemies, and then the Lord showing himself to be faithful to them. They all get saved. There is no way that any responsible exegete can take these events and try to impose them at the end of the millennium, okay? The bottom line is the case for Gog being the Antichrist. Oh, and by the way, you can't move it back 7 years before the return of Jesus either. So the same arguments that make it clear that Ezekiel 38:39 is in fact the Antichrist and not some pre-Antichrist invader, they hold true for showing that it doesn't take place at the end of the millennium. So the case for Gog being
Okay. Uh, so in the meantime, as it's loading, I'm going to explain the verses I did not look at yet. Verse 26.
being the Antichrist, it is watertight. It is watertight. I'll be debating Tommy Ice on this issue.
Let me just pause that. Okay. So we're about halfway. It says here, they shall bear their reproach. We read that already. When I have brought them back from the nations. So not from the people, from the nations, from all the countries, and gathered them out of the countries of the nations. So these aren't enemies' lands. These are countries that they've gone to. Maybe France, maybe Germany, maybe America. I don't know. But it's nations, other places. I will be sanctified among them in the presence of the nations. And they shall know that I am Yah, their Elohim. So Israel will know that when I've been manifested to them. So he's going to show himself, manifest himself. It's not going to be invisible. You're going to see it with your own eyes. They're going to see it. A very clear evidence of his existence. Um, it's going to defy all science and logic and mathematics, all everything the media has been saying, that there is no God. They shall know that I am Yah, their Elohim. Okay. But I've gathered them to their own land. I've left none of them anymore there. Okay, so we can see that it diverges very much in these last two verses. This is the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. It doesn't say that he caused them to be led into captivity, but have gathered them into their own land, and have left none of them anymore there. No, it doesn't say that. That is completely false. It says that they will know because he will be shown, he will be manifested to them among the nations. The whole planet will see God is real. It's not because he brought them into their own land or led them into captivity. No, it just says he's going to release them from captivity. He's going to reverse that. He's going to turn back uh, the captivity in Jacob. He's going to have mercy on them. So he's going to save them. Um, and when he says, have left none of them anymore there, that's not true either, because they're going to be, the way that Joel is reading it, saying that no one will be left behind. That's false as well, because it also says that they will be delivered up to the sword. It says right there, verse 23, the hands of their enemies, they'll be delivered into their hands of the enemies. And they all fell by the sword. So many people of Israel are going to die. That's what it says. I'm not making it up. You can read it for yourself. In verse 29, this is probably the biggest difference. Masoretic, neither will I hide my face any more from them. Okay, neither will no more turn away my face from them. And then it says, for I have poured out my spirit upon the house of Israel. Okay, pouring out your spirit is a good thing, is it not? But what does the Septuagint say? What does the truth say? I have poured out my wrath. So he's not going to turn his face away from them anymore, because they have been punished, essentially, because I punished them. They've been punished. They've received their judgment. So I'm not going to turn my face from them anymore. I'm going to be with them. That's good news. In a way, it's bad news because it doesn't say my spirit is upon them, but it's good news because in the narrative, it makes sense that he's not going to turn away his face from them. He's going to be facing them. He's going to be with them. He's going to be supporting them. He's going to be helping them. But in the Masoretic, it just says, I'm not going to hide my face, whatever that means. But he's going to pour out his spirit upon them. That's not what's going to happen at all. It says, I have poured out my wrath. So it's actually the opposite. I'd rather have the wrath, not that I want to have punishment, but you want to have this because he's saying this is done. I've poured out. The wrath is over, at least in this verse. Like, they faced the consequences for their actions. They've been punished. So now I will not turn away my face from them, uh, because he brought them back. He turned away the captivity. So he saved them, essentially. All right, let's continue listening.
In August this year, we've debated a little bit on the radio, and I pointed out that, Tommy, you're being inconsistent. If you're trying to say this is a pre-Antichrist invasion, you are ignoring all of these passages. If we just read the passage, verse 21 to the end of the chapter, all of the events and details that are described, they can only make sense if they take place and culminate with the return of Jesus. And so the same arguments that disprove this being a pre-Antichrist invader, they disprove the idea that it could take place at the end of the millennium. If we say this happens at the end of the millennium, we have to say that when Jesus returns, he is unable to save his people, and that during the 1,000 years that he's on the ground ruling from Jerusalem, his people are taken captive, they're not restored, they don't even come to know the Lord. That's impossible. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous position to take. Okay, so that's the first issue. Now let's go back to this issue of living safely. We go, well, Joel, are they living safely or not? No, listen, if you're in bed at night sleeping, and there is someone outside your window who is about to break in and smash through your window and murder you and your family, but you're sound asleep, are you living safely or not? The answer is no. You're about to be invaded. You're about to be attacked. This is the same situation with Israel. Israel is about to be invaded. Now, they may think they're secure. They may feel secure, but they're not truly secure. And this is the issue. This is the same picture that's being described in Ezekiel 38. They feel secure, but that is exactly when the Antichrist chooses to invade them. Now, this reference to the Antichrist attacking at a time when people feel secure. This is exactly what Daniel the prophet refers to. And so you can look it up in Daniel 8, verse 25. It says, the Antichrist will cause deceit to prosper. He will consider himself superior when they feel secure. He will destroy many, take his stand against the Prince of Princes, right? So when does the Antichrist attack?
We need, we need to look up this verse as well. He said Daniel 8:25. And that's also a reason why I'm doing this video. So besides the one we saw where I'll pour out my spirit, or it clearly doesn't say that, it says I'll pour out my wrath. I'm kind of ahead of myself because I'm really supposed to be in Numbers, but I thought I'm not covering Ezekiel 38, start to finish. I'm pretty much just looking at what Joel's talking about in this prophecy, considering looking at Gog and Magog. So Daniel 8 verse 25. Let's look at those two verses and see if they agree, and I don't think they do. Okay, it's not 8:25. Oh, it is. Okay. Through his policy, also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. So talking about, I believe this is talking about what he's referring to, Gog, Magog, possibly. Let's just look at the full context here. Okay. So this is a lot of symbolism here. But he ties it to Gog and Magog. I'm not going to disagree with that because it says at the latter time of their kingdom, when their sins are coming to the full, uh, shall arise a king bold in countenance and understanding riddles. His power shall be great. He shall destroy wonderfully and prosper and practice and shall destroy mighty men and the holy people. So the set apart people, who are the set apart people, those who have the testimony of the anointed one, Joshua, and keep the Torah. Those are the holy people, set apart ones, the New Testament church, or the believers. The yoke of his chain shall prosper, versus his policy shall cause craft to prosper. That's not what it says. He shall magnify himself in his heart. Okay. And by peace shall destroy many. How do you destroy people by peace? By tricking them? No, it says here, by craft shall destroy many. So by trickery, by his plans, whatever that is. And he shall also stand up against the Prince of Princes. So they're saying he's standing up against maybe Jesus Christ, who people say is Prince of Peace, or Prince of Princes. But he shall be broken without hand, talking about Gog and Magog. But in the Septuagint doesn't say that. It says he shall stand up for the destruction of many. He's going to commit genocide. And is he going to be successful? Yeah. It says he shall crush them like eggs in his hand. So this is looking like either persecution of the believers or just general genocide, mass slaughtering going on. So that's the second reason I'm doing this video, is not only because of that, what we saw, the difference there in Ezekiel 38 and 39, but a massive difference as well in Daniel 8. That he's not going to be broken without hand. I'm not saying he's going to not be contested, but in this verse, he's successful. He isn't losing here in this verse. He's actually winning. This this king, this who is describing there. Okay, I'm going to let Joel continue on.
When people feel secure, they're not really secure, they just feel secure. It's the same thing with Israel. They have a false sense of security because, first of all, they're living in rebellion against God. They're back in the land, but they're not serving him. Again, go to Tel Aviv today. Go to Tel Aviv, go to the Holy Land. You get out of your taxi, there's going to be kids strung out on drugs, drunk at night, nightclubs everywhere. There'll be these little cards all over the ground everywhere with numbers for call girls with basic pornography on them, inviting, I mean, openly advertising for prostitution. There's strip clubs. Israel is it's the homosexual capital of the Middle East. And look, I'm not bashing Israel, but for clarity, as a people, they are not by and large serving the Lord God of Israel. And so as a result of that, of course, they're not truly secure. Of course, they're not truly secure. The Lord will finally chastise his people. He will show himself to be faithful, and he will bring them all to himself. Okay, and then Daniel 11:21, same thing. It says the Antichrist will invade the kingdom when its people feel secure. He will seize it through intrigue. And then again in verse 24, when the richest provinces, which most argue is speaking of Israel, when they feel secure, he will invade them and he will achieve what neither his fathers nor his forefathers did. So you've got at least 3 references to the Antichrist in Daniel saying that he invades when the people feel secure. And it's the same thing in Ezekiel. Gog invades when the people feel secure. It's not genuine security. So that's the first issue. Now, the next issue is this, is God directly says to Ezekiel, he goes, listen, are you not the one that I have spoken of by my former prophets? For many years they prophesied that in the last...
Okay, so I hope that paused. Okay, so I'm going to look at what he just talked about, what he referred to. Daniel 11:21. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. There shall arise out of his root one that shall cause a plant of the kingdom to pass over his place. Uh, so it's not a raiser of taxes. I don't know what that's about, but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Earning kingly glory, and yet in those days shall he be broken, yet not openly nor in war. So he's going to lose his authority or his glory secretly, kind of covertly. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Shall stand on his place who has been set a nothing, a naught, and they have not put upon him the honor of the kingdom. But he shall come in prosperously, not peaceably, he'll come in prosperously and obtain the kingdom by deceitful ways. So these are not just flatteries. He's going to lie his way to the top. With the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him. Okay. Yes, the prince of the covenant. The arms of him that overflows shall be washed away, shall be broken, and the head of the covenant. I'm not sure what that means. After the league with him, he shall work deceitfully. So these are alliances. So alliances made with him, he shall work deceit. For he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. And he shall come up and overpower them with a small nation. Interesting that it's saying it's a small country. So this leader comes from a small country, probably not big in population, maybe even land-wise. He shall enter peaceably, prosperity, it says, and even upon the fattest places of the province he shall do that which its fathers have not done. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds even for a time. Now it says here, he shall devise plans against Egypt even for a time. So that's going to be, if you're Egyptian, if you live in Egypt, you're going to want to watch out for this guy. He's going to betray you, or if not betray you, at least be against you. He shall, if this hasn't happened already, but I feel like this is, as Joel is saying, it sounds like an end time prophecy. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Okay. The king of the south shall engage in war with his forces shall not stand. Okay. For they shall devise plans against him. Okay, I'm going to end it there because he's not really going this far. All right.
days, I would bring you against my people Israel, right? So God says to Gog, The Lord God of Israel says to Gog directly, are you not the one? Are you not the one that all of the other prophets are talking about? Now, if Gog is an invader only at the end of the millennium and not before the millennium, then show me, I challenge you to show me one reference anywhere throughout the prophets that came before Ezekiel, the pre-Ezekielian prophets, where they're talking about a post-millennial invasion, a Gog-Magog post-millennial invasion of Israel. You can't find it. Now, you can find many references to the prophets talking about the Antichrist, this final invasion of Israel at the end of the age. God basically directly says to Gog, he says, you're the same guy. You're the same guy that all the prophets have been talking about, who have said, they've been prophesying that at the end of the age, I'm going to bring you against my people. You know, again, you can't apply that to the end of the millennium. Now, so here's the other thing is, and this is what we need to take note of, and again, I highlight this in my book, Mideast Beast, is the fact that when you look at the various references in Ezekiel and you compare them to the references in Revelation that are talking about the Antichrist, they're clearly the same. So in Ezekiel, you have the reference to the great feast where the cry goes out, come, gather to the birds of the air, to the beasts of the field, gather together to the great supper of God that I am preparing for you, and you will feast on the flesh of kings, on horses, riders, warriors, and all of these things, right? This reference, this feast, there's only one such feast referenced in all of Scripture. And it just so happens that it's Revelation 19, which is the quintessential picture of the return of Jesus that virtually every Christian knows. That's the verse, that's the chapter, the passage that actually is quoting directly from Ezekiel 38:39. So do you get this? God is taking a massive motif, a massive time marker from Ezekiel 38:39, and he is tying it to the return of Jesus.
For this week's program, we are offering the Understanding the Times Prophecy DVD bundle.
Okay, so I'll just let that play in the background. I'm not going to play the sound for that, but yeah, I've been watching Joel's stuff. Actually, I was led to his channel through, I was watching Waleed Shubat's presentations about the end time prophecies and his perspective, which is from Middle Eastern perspective. He's from that culture. And it's important to realize the Bible, the Torah, the Tanakh, the Holy Scriptures, Old and New Testaments are written from that cultural perspective. Although the Bible is timeless and it's for mankind, our culture in the West, if you live in the West and those in Europe too, is drastically different than the culture of the Bible. Now, for the most part, the Middle Eastern people have preserved a lot of their cultural uh, cultural practices and how they treat elders, how they're hospitable, how they eat, how they dress. A lot of their routines, a lot of their daily living is very much like the Bible. It's not far removed, except for when you look at technology, computers, and cars and things like that. And industry, the industrial revolution. Oh, here, let me just rewind it to 20. Just rewind it a little bit there. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you to Joel Richardson for this video. I'm going to link the video in the description box.
Throughout.
Let me just wait for him to appear again. Okay, I think he'll be back.
Understanding the Times DVD bundle.
Okay, so now let me just wrap it up and say this. So people say, okay, Joel, you've proven that Ezekiel's not talking about the same events at the end of Revelation, at the end of the millennium in Revelation 20. So why do they use the same name? Listen, it's very simple. If today, and this is, let's say today you turn on the news and someone says, oh, today there was a financial Armageddon on Wall Street. This is a statement which has just come to be commonly understood and accepted within modern society, saying there is a catastrophe on Wall Street, but it is fundamentally detached from the biblical, historical, and geographical context of the mountain of Megiddo in Israel. Has nothing to do with this Tel Megiddo, which is actually just a ruin of an ancient city in Israel. No, it's talking about Armageddon. You could say the same thing of the phrase Armageddon. It was a financial Armageddon on Wall Street. It has nothing to do with the end of the world. It has to do with a metaphorical end of the world, but not even that. And that would be an exaggeration. In the same way, by the first century, we need to understand that this phrase, Gog and Magog, it was commonly used throughout much of the intertestamental literature. We find it used in First Enoch. We find it used in Jubilees. We find references to it in the Syllabine oracles. And so we need to understand that Gog and Magog, Ezekiel 38:39, this is the Armageddon of the Old Testament. This is the main passage, and this phrase, Gog and Magog, is the most common motif that people would, the catchphrase that those of the first century would have understood to refer to Satan and his sock puppet on the earth. And that's exactly what the Antichrist is he is Satan and he is Satan's sock puppet, and it is this assault against the people of Israel. And so when Revelation 20 says, at the very end of the millennium, Gog and Magog, this would just be like if he said the same thing. At the end of the millennium, then there'll be sort of this repeat of Armageddon for a very brief period. However, when they approach the city of God, fire comes down and devours them. In the Jewish mind, this term Gog and Magog would have been very commonly understood to refer to this satanic assault on the city. And that's all it's referring to. And we don't understand it because we have been confused by many of the popular prophecy teachers that say this is something other than the Antichrist. And that's exactly why it's confusing. When we understand that Ezekiel's telling the same story, then it all makes sense. So I hope this has cleared up this issue for some of you. As usual, I know I repeat myself a lot. I really want to try to drive some of my points home. But, as usual, I just skim the surface. We just barely touched on some of these issues. I could teach on this for an hour and very thoroughly show how these are clearly two different events. It doesn't work. It doesn't work to try to put Ezekiel at the end of the millennium. It just simply doesn't work. These are two different events. And so, as usual, the whole idea that this invasion coming, this Middle Eastern and North African invasion led by Turkey, as we have pointed out elsewhere, it's a clear proof of the fact that the Antichrist is not a Roman European leader, and that Gog is, in fact, the Antichrist. And the Antichrist will, in fact, come from the Islamic world. The church needs to wake up. The church needs to be ready. The church needs to be prepared, not just, ready in terms of having bullets and self-protection, but being ready to rise to meet the challenge of Islam in very practical ways, but ultimately with the gospel, because that is what the end of the age is all about, is the church rising up to proclaim the gospel in one final glorious witness to the earth, to all the peoples of the earth. That is what this is about, and that is the application of what some people might think is a relevant prophecy. It's very relevant. So that's all the time that we have for this week, folks. Again, I want to thank you so much for being with us. I look forward to seeing you next week. I'm Joel Richardson, and this is The Underground.
Okay, so again, Joel Richardson, his perspective on the Bible and prophecy is very refreshing. He's one of the few that teach the Middle Eastern perspective in terms of not just culture, but also looking at prophecy, just looking at prophecy as it's written. He's not putting in his own interpretation as to, okay, it says Egypt, but it actually means something else. Or it says Babylon, that's not actually Babylon. It's a spiritual Babylon. Or, but he's along the lines of Walid Shoebat, where they look at, the fastest growing religion, and they're tying it with that. And to be able to perceive that it's not just a phenomenon, the fastest growing religion since how many years was that after Yeshua? I think it was 600 years after him. I'm not sure, but I mean that developed. That is certainly a prophetic movement as well, because without it, a lot of these prophecies will not be fulfilled. Just like the uh, giving statehood to the nation of Israel in 1948, a lot of the prophecies that we read in Ezekiel 38 and 39 cannot be fulfilled without Israel actually being in the land of Israel, like geographically there. So, um, again, I've watched a lot of his videos. Well, maybe not a lot, but I've started to watch his videos from the beginning, from his first upload. Not every single video, but at least the ones that I find intriguing. So I've been watching his stuff, and for the most part, I agree with almost everything, except for this video. It's the first time where I actually was shaking my head, not because it's something that's just of my opinion. Again, it's because of the scriptures. If you actually read it in black and white, it's saying something completely different than what is being presented. Uh, but I'm not going to put the blame on Joel. It's not his fault. He didn't write the Masoretic text. He's only reading what he has there. So if he used the Septuagint, he would see exactly what I'm seeing. And this video will. I'm going to name it a message to Joel Richardson, Gog and Magog prophecy. So that's all I have for this presentation. I don't know if we'll do another video today, but this had to be done. If I didn't do it, I feel like I'm not really fulfilling my role here, I guess, on this planet. I feel like that's one thing I need to do, um, especially if I know better. I've seen this and I have to share it. I can't just keep it to myself. That would not be good. Um, yeah, this channel is called Secrets Revealed, the Holy Bible. And I do feel it's related to what we read in scriptures, where the words are sealed, but they will be unsealed. And maybe this channel is one cog in all these other cogs. Look at Joel Richardson. He's also playing a big part in opening the eyes of many people to the truth of the Bible and the truth of who the Messiah is, uh, who is Jesus Christ, Yeshua, HaMashiach. And yeah, maybe perhaps he's part of that as well, where he's unsealing some perspectives. Waleed Shubat as well. And a lot of people have their own respective ministries. You look at Joseph Dumond with the calendar. You look at Rebecca uh, Biederman with the uh, looking at the land of Israel, determining the new year, determining when the crops are ready to be harvested. When is the feasts? When are the feast days? That is incredibly important. And then this channel, where I'm looking just at the word of Yah, which is, I think, is the most valuable, priceless thing we could ever buy or ever strive to have in this lifetime. So, there's a lot of people who made a lot of money today, but I mean, to put in perspective, even if at $1 billion, is this information not worth more than all the money in the world? And I would say it is. This has to do with the fate of mankind, has to do with the fate of Israel, has to do with the plans of Yah, what he's going to accomplish, how he's going to manifest himself. He's going to show himself to the world in the way he's going to intervene when it comes to the land of Israel. And we're also going to see a lot of suffering, a lot of people being killed, a lot of believers. I mean, there are already believers being killed, but I mean, we're going to see it on even a larger scale, where people will be like mass genocide. So that's all I have for today. Thank you very much for your time. May God bless you and make your way prosperous. This is Secrets Revealed, the Holy Bible. And thanks again to Joel Richardson. God bless you in your ministry and keep you healthy and make you prosper. Okay, peace be unto you and shalom.